the 3Ps and the 3Cs, this to me really illuminated kind of the world we live in. And so basically, to kind of share a little bit of a backstory, I was a mountain bike instructor for a long time. I loved teaching, I loved coaching, trying to distill down these complex ideas, these biomechanical movements into their simplest form. And I was coaching this group of really inspiring individuals. When was it? In 2020, I think it was. And these guys have started phenomenal businesses, and one of them at the time was writing a book. And in this book, he talks about this idea, and he shared it with me, about the 3Ps and the 3Cs. And it's this idea that the world we live in today has a fixation on the 3Ps, which are prestige, power, and possessions. So we set all of our goals around the new job so that people look up to us, or the possessions. We want the Lamborghini. And in my mind, that's kind of like we're looking for a way out. We're looking to fill this void. We want people to look at us. We want all of the things. We want this happiness, but it's external. When in reality, if we actually pause for a second and ask ourselves, what makes us happy? What are 2 or 3 of the most kind of like favorite moments that you've had throughout your life? And if you pause and think about that, it's never usually the 3Ps, prestige, power, and possessions. Instead, it's around the 3Cs, connections, contributions, and challenges. It's when we connect with other people like this, we're connecting with like-minded individuals. It's when we contribute, when we give back to society, give back to our community, feel like we're providing value. And then it's when we challenge ourselves, whether that's in relationships, whether that's in our jobs, whether it's in sports, we're challenging ourselves to be the best version of ourselves. And so instead of looking outwards, prestige, power, and possessions, it's kind of looking inwards. How do I connect with others, challenge myself, and contribute back to society? And what I think is really fascinating about Bitcoin, what I absolutely love about Bitcoin is kind of, to me, creating this foundation where people are increasingly looking to the 3Cs, connections, contributions, and challenges. Because we have a savings vehicle that gives us more capacity as our purchasing power grows, we start to have more capacity to look inwards and question, who am I and how do I want to show up? What values really resonate with me? How do I want to support my community, support my family? People are starting to have kids again. People are having hope for the future. And so to me, the 3Cs and the 3Ps, Bitcoin really illuminates this kind of supporting of the connections, contributions, and challenges. Anyway, I've rambled enough. I'll pass it back to you guys.
Welcome all to the 34th episode of the podcast Store of Bitcoin. And today we are joined by Seb Bunney, a co-founder of Looking Glass Education and long-time educator in the Bitcoin space. Seb has a background in economics and finance and is passionate about breaking down complex financial concepts into simple, relatable lessons for everyday people. Through his writing, talks, and education platform, he has been helping thousands understand not only Bitcoin, but also the bigger picture of money, market, and human behavior. In this episode, we will explore Seb's journey into Bitcoin, the problems with our current financial system, and how education plays a key role in building a more decentralized and resilient future. Seb, welcome to the show. Nice to have you here.
Oh man, thanks a lot for having me on, guys. Honestly, I think that like Bitcoin, because there is no centralized marketing department, its success ultimately falls on the shoulders of the individuals. And so it's conversations like this, it's conversations with passionate individuals that want to kind of share their love for this amazing technology that ultimately allow for kind of Bitcoin success. And so I appreciate you guys having me on, and I'm looking forward to talking.
Thanks. Hi, Francesco. Hi, Johan. How are you doing?
Hello, Seb. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Fine, thanks.
On your comment, totally true. Bitcoin has no marketing team, and we are here discussing about Bitcoin. Probably there is no other single topic where there are so many podcasts and books in the as it has been in the last 1 or 2 years.
Without having a marketing 100%. Team. And I find it interesting because you think about the US dollar, and I don't know groups of people that are meeting weekly to discuss the US dollar and talk about the US dollar. And so I think Bitcoin's success, again, like it's on the shoulders of the individuals. And I just love these conversations, and to see such the diverse mix of people from all different backgrounds and sharing about Bitcoin from their unique perspective, whether they're a doctor, an economist, a mountain bike instructor, like we all see how Bitcoin impacts us positively.
It's auto control, I would say. It's nobody could have expected, so that's it's working. Oh yeah, right.
First question for you, Seb. I listened to the podcast with Preston Pish. It was really great and enlightening for me. And my first question will be, how did you learn about Bitcoin? And then also, why we should focus as individual on the 3C instead of 3P? I think that was a concept that really interesting for also for the listeners.
Totally. So first off, I'll answer like, how did I find about Bitcoin? And a little while back, I was talking with Daniel Prince, and a lot of people probably know Daniel Prince, amazing podcast, Once Bitten. And we're talking about this idea of kind of these pre-Bitcoin orange pill moments. So before Bitcoin even existed, we kind of had these moments that I think made us question the world around us. And there was one in particular for me that I write about in my book where I was about maybe 7, 8 years old. I really wanted this scooter. I went into this toy store and I was like, that's the scooter I want. I'm going to save up for it. And so I saved up my pocket money for a few months. And then I went back in there with my dad, and my dad felt guilty that I was getting a scooter and my other two brothers weren't. So he ended up deciding, you know what, Seb, you can pay for your scooter and I'm going to pay for your other two brothers. And I remember walking out of there being like, the world is so unfair. This is like, come on, I've just saved up all my money for months to buy this thing. But in reality, what I find really interesting is that on a microcosm was a reflection of the world we live in today. Our monetary system benefits some people and not others. And what's interesting is because that experience for me was about saving up for something that I cared about, and then going and purchasing that thing, I lean towards a lot more of this like free market capitalist approach, the Austrian approach to money. Whereas I look at my brothers, who my parents supported, they have a lot more of a socialist handout approach. So it's kind of like the way that we approach life, the way we think about things very much shapes our political ideologies and our views. And so this was kind of one of those little moments before Bitcoin even existed that I think made me question money. It made me question the world around me. But ultimately, I'd say Bitcoin, again, is one of those things where I think all of us have these touch points. And the first few times we hear about it, it doesn't really interest us that much. We think it's a scam. We think it's a Ponzi scheme. And I remember my brother was buying drugs on the Silk Road. And at the time, I was very down the rabbit hole of Warren Buffett. And Warren Buffett was just like, you never invest in anything that doesn't have cash flows. So he doesn't like gold. Bitcoin is rat poison squared. And I remember I just parroted everything that Warren Buffett said. And so I told my brother, I'm like, what are you doing? You're buying Bitcoin to buy drugs. Like, don't do that. You're just an idiot. And so ultimately, that was my first touch point. Then I watched a couple documentaries, read a couple books. And then I would say in 2017, 2018, it really started to click. And in 2020, I was like, this thing is going to change the world. And I quit my job and dedicated all my time to it. And so I've been working in the space since 2020 and been curious about it since a few years prior to that. But the second question, the 3Ps and the 3Cs, this to me like really illuminated kind of the world we live in. And so basically, to kind of share a little bit of a backstory, I was a mountain bike instructor for a long time. I loved teaching, I loved coaching, trying to distill down these complex ideas, these biomechanical movements into their simplest form. And I was coaching this group of really inspiring individuals. When was it? In 2020, I think it was. And these guys have started phenomenal businesses. And one of them at the time was writing a book. And in this book, he talks about this idea, and he shared it with me, about the 3Ps and the 3Cs. And it's this idea that the world we live in today has a fixation on the 3Ps, which are prestige, power, and possessions. So we set all of our goals around the new job so that people look up to us, or the possessions. We want the Lamborghini. And in my mind, that's kind of like we're looking for a way out. We're looking to fill this void. We want people to look at us. We want all of the things. We want this happiness, but it's external. When in reality, if we actually pause for a second and ask ourselves, what makes us happy? What are 2 or 3 of the most kind of like favorite moments that you've had throughout your life? And if you pause and think about that, it's never usually the 3Ps, prestige, power, and possessions. Instead, it's around the 3Cs, connections, contributions, and challenges. It's when we connect with other people like this, we're connecting with like-minded individuals. It's when we contribute, when we give back to society, give back to our community, feel like we're providing value. And then it's when we challenge ourselves, whether that's in relationships, whether that's in our jobs, whether it's in sports, we're challenging ourselves to be the best version of ourselves. And so instead of looking outwards, prestige, power, and possessions, it's kind of looking inwards. How do I connect with others, challenge myself, and contribute back to society? And what I think is really fascinating about Bitcoin, what I absolutely love about Bitcoin is kind of, to me, creating this foundation where people are increasingly looking to the three C's: connections, contributions, and challenges. Because we have a savings vehicle that gives us more capacity as our purchasing power grows, we start to have more capacity to look inwards and question, who am I and how do I want to show up? What values really resonate with me? How do I want to support my community, support my family? People are starting to have kids again. People are having hope for the future. And so to me, the three C's and the three P's, Bitcoin really illuminates this kind of supporting of the connections, contributions, and challenges. Anyway, I've rambled enough. I'll pass it back to you guys.
Thanks for the explanation. Very deep thought. And on what you said about Warren Buffett and dividend stock, I always reply, oh, so bad Bitcoin doesn't have a 3 or 4% dividend. We will contend of 80, 100% annual return. It's fine.
It's just a misunderstanding. Like, to me, it's just such a misunderstanding of money and finances when people are like, I want something that throws off cash flows. And it's like, well, if you have something that's appreciating at 50, 60, 70% a year on average, and you draw down at 5% a year, you're still massively outperforming something that grows at 5% a year and throws off a 3, 4% dividend. So it's backwards.
What you said absolutely resonates with me, because also I think we are shifting from an economy, from a world of takers, which is the fiat economy, to a world of givers, because you have to connect, to give, to challenge yourself. So it's very easy where fiat money is involved to go for a society of takers, because it's clear that the first one who puts the money into the fiat money as printed has the most benefit. So there is a rush to take advantage of other people, to take possession, as you said, of this money before it is too late. It's worth nothing for the cantillon effect. So yes, again, I really see with this transition in Bitcoin, we are moving from a society of takers to a society of givers, and this is the engine underneath for sure is Bitcoin.
Oh man, I could not agree more. I think like one kind of little phrase that I kind of use a lot is this idea of kind of realigning incentives. And I think the problem with fiat money is when you have a system that's controlled, it is centralized, they can take from the productive workforce. And you end up with countries like the UK right now. The last time I checked, 52.6% of British citizens receive more in benefits than they pay in taxes. And you're just like, how can you have a society where over half the population receives more in benefits than they pay in taxes? And then what you realize is you're going to be stuck in an interventionistic cycle, because the majority are going to vote to receive interventions, subsidies, stimulus from the productive workforce. So then the productive workforce just leaves. And so I think what's interesting about Bitcoin is when you have a monetary system that increases in purchasing power over the time, cannot be co-opted, is decentralized, you incentivize productivity. If the only way you can obtain capital is through value creation, you force that free market, which I think is truly profound.
I agree. And yes, we are the first innings of this unfolding. And it's also a matter, because if the core issue is who gets the first rights on this property, then of course it's like a trauma, like reiterating. Somebody gets screwed, then they have to screw other people not to be screwed, and so it's a never-ending story. And that's the world how it is now. Is going to be very different.
Absolutely.
Also, another point very important you made in your reply was the curiosity, and also this now is I'm in Bitcoin since 2021. 21 not by chance, because it was when the price is going up, so it was when I mostly become interested. I also noticed that one of the most common traits for Bitcoiners is curiosity, because I see many other people who are super intelligent, great job, likely also 130, 140 IQ, but still they are not getting Bitcoin, not even the basic. And also one of the reasons probably is because they don't want to challenge the status quo or questions or things they always given for granted in their life. So to be able to understand Bitcoin, probably curiosity is one of the first requirements. What do you think?
I couldn't agree more. And hopefully upstairs there's a little bit of constructions. Hopefully you guys can't hear the bang in the background. But you know what's interesting is that when you actually go back throughout history and you read a lot about where we came from small little hunter-gatherer tribes. And the challenge is that if you're in a small little community and you get exiled from that community, then you're surely going to die. It's very hard to survive on your own back in those days, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 years ago. And so we have this evolutionary adaptation to want to socially conform to a certain extent. We want to conform with our community to fit in so that we don't get exiled. But the problem is the world we live in today, that's not necessarily true. If you get exiled from your community that wants to be pro-intervention, pro-stimulus, pro-deterioration of money, you can go find another community that aligns with your values. But we've still got this evolutionary adaptation to conform. And what I find really interesting about Bitcoin is, and you guys have probably stumbled across this study, there was a study that looked at the Myers-Briggs personality traits of Bitcoiners. And what's interesting is one of the rarest personality traits, I think it's called INTJ, the introvert INTJ or INFJ, in the fiat world, in Bitcoin makes up like a large percentage of Bitcoiners. And they're people that are willing to question. They're people that are curious. They want to seek truth as opposed to just conformity. And so that I find is really, really fascinating. It's a group of individuals that are willing to look at their own biases and question the status quo to try and build a better world.
True. And probably also this opportunity to understand Bitcoin when everyone was against, that was in the previous cycle, especially 2018 or 2022, when there was FTX crashes, Bitcoin down from 69 to 50 to 16, the institutional world against, being like contrarian on the rest and being in favor of Bitcoin was like a unique chance in the life. It will not happen anymore in the future. Now we have the institutions, also the people who are against, they are not so much against as they were 4 years ago. So there was one chance some years ago and we took it.
I think it's so cool. And what I find is really interesting as well is like Bitcoin is almost like a filter feature. I find that when you go to a conference or you go to some of these in-person events or you jump on a call like this, you can talk to someone and ask a couple little questions around Bitcoin. And within a few minutes, you can understand how much time they've spent diving into Bitcoin. Like if someone starts talking about how deflation is key to an abundant future, you're just like, this person has spent at least 100 hours diving into Bitcoin, which I find is really, really cool. There's not many subjects at which you're able to very quickly grasp someone's worldview in so many different areas.
Similar to Bitcoin mining, very hard to make, but easy to verify that the block was correct. Yeah, same. Interesting.
Yeah, it's all proof of work.
True. True. Another question. Yeah, please, Johan, go on.
Yeah. So I've read your book, and I really recommend it to people. It's a great book. So much signal in it. But I know I listened to the other podcast as well in my preparation for this conversation. So I don't want to ask too much the same questions. So I came up with a few questions that I really maybe not a question, but really to pick your brain, and I'm very curious what you think about it. But like Jesse Myers, he wrote an article where he investigates what the difference is between Homo sapiens sapiens and Homo sapiens Neanderthalers. And in his essay, he made the case that the sapiens, they developed something in their brain that they appreciate scarcity, and with the appreciate of so they appreciate it, they want to accumulate it, and with the accumulation of this scarce asset, they could overcome Dunbar's limit and could trade with more than 150 people. And so my question is, like some people say, money is the root cause of all evil. And your book is called The Hidden Cost of Money. But my question is, and I mean, I think money is neutral. So my question would be, do you think all money, there are hidden costs for all money or only bad money? So, because a knife, a knife is technology, and in the hands of a surgeon, it's good, but in the hands of a somebody who wants to attack another one, it's bad.
No, I think you're absolutely spot on. And I very much believe like Bitcoin or money in general is amoral. It's in the eye of the beholder. It's in the user, which determines kind of whether or not it's being used for good or whether it's being used for bad. And I think that unfortunately, the money we use today, these fiat currencies, they have very much been co-opted over time. And so there's many sayings around money, like money is the root of all evil, as you're saying, or it's bad to talk about money, or like basically there's so many negative sayings around money. And what I would argue is that that's got nothing to do with money. It's got to do with the type of money people are using that's then impacting them. If you've got money that's losing value over time, it makes life harder. And so you view money as causing this hardness, not necessarily the type of money that you're using is causing this kind of challenge that you're facing in life. And so one of the analogies I kind of use to describe money is that, like language, money is just a medium of expression. In language, we use words to describe the world we live in, to be able to express what it is that we value to one another. Well, money is no different. It's a form of monetary expression. If I see someone going into a grocery store and buying grass-fed beef and organic vegetables, and then I see someone else going and buying cigarettes and microwave meals, I can see what they value by where they direct their capital. I understand if someone appreciates the outdoors and they're buying outdoor gear, or someone's appreciating cars and they're buying new cars, you can see what they value by how they spend their money. And I think that the challenge is that when we distort those flows, when we impact people from spending their money where they see fit, that's when we lead to all of these repercussions and challenges we face in society. And so one of the kind of examples I give in the book, and this isn't necessarily a monetary example, but it really highlights the importance of expression, is the idea of depression. And maybe to give a little bit of a backstory, I've always found kind of trauma, childhood upbringings really, really fascinating. And so if we kind of break down what is depression, depression is the depressing of emotions. If as a child, our parents didn't allow us to express certain emotions, anger, sadness, they were negative emotions. As we get older, if we'd never learned to express those emotions, when we feel them coming up, we don't know what to do with them. And it's very easy to lead into anxiety, lead into depression, because we never learned how to express those things. Well, it's the same thing with money. If money is broken down to the point where there's capital controls that impede you from spending your money overseas, there's inflation so that prices are rising, so your purchasing power buys less over time, or there's regulation that prevent you from spending money in certain industries and sectors, what that is, it's an impedance to your expression. It's impeding your ability as an individual to express where you want to. And that, I would argue, leads to a lot of the challenges that we face in society today. For instance, if money is losing value over time, are we incentivized to save or spend? We're incentivized to spend because our purchasing power is greatest in the present moment. So all of a sudden, you have a society that's incentivized to consume, consume, consume. That's not money's fault. It's the type of money we're using that's deteriorating over time. It's changing people's behavior. And so kind of like to your question, I think money is truly profound and it shapes how we show up. But money itself is amoral. It's just the money we're using alters how we show up and how we think about money.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
because go ahead. No, I'm sorry, I didn't want
No.
to.
You go.
Yes, I want to say on this point that it's also we waste a lot of time, the merchants, all the things we buy, because as you say in your book, there is some kind of anxiety, because they people are in the debt cycles to spend this money before it gets worthless, and then they do stupid things and blah blah blah. Then they cannot go to the end of the month because they spend too much and not have the mindset of saving it because it teaches them to spend, not to save. So I'm wondering, what if we are in a Bitcoin society? How can the merchants really proliferate because more people will spend less. Probably, what I think is that they will spend less, but they will just buy what they really need. So, how do you address the question of consumption of the merchants, which is according to the Keynesian economy, is stimulated by inflation, but here we are in a deflationary world, and that should shrink, but that's not good to address wealth inequality because less merchants will get richer. What's the point of view in this idealistic scenario, which one day will become actual?
So that's a really good question. And I think that it's really challenging because as money is breaking down and we have GDP, like GDP is basically our metric globally for success, but all GDP is monetary transactions. The GDP of Canada or the GDP of friggin' Italy or the GDP of the US is just the combination of all of the transactions that taken place within inside that border in a given year. And so if we want to say a country is doing well, what we want to see is GDP growth. So we want to see growth in monetary transactions. But underlying that, what are we actually trying to measure? We're actually trying to measure quality of life. We're actually trying to measure, do people feel like they're progressing and life is getting better? And so I think that what will happen if we were to transition to a Bitcoin-based world where our purchasing power increased over time, all of a sudden, GDP is a really interesting metric because I think it starts breaking down. If our purchasing power is increasing over time and people are incentivized to save, then GDP as a metric can be falling, while at the same time, people have got increased capacity to show up more authentically. So happiness, productivity, a sense of kind of like prosperity can actually be increasing. And so I think what we have to do is change our metric for what we deem as success. And GDP is not that metric. Because just because we're having consumption, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're actually improving our quality of life. And what I'm also seeing as well is that when we target GDP growth as our metric, what we're also doing is we're incentivizing more and more monetary transactions. And so if I create, I don't know, I've got an educational platform called Looking Glass Education. And Looking Glass Education, our whole goal is creating education for the layperson. Now, right now, all of the content on there is free. So it's not contributing to GDP at all. So in the eyes of the government, well, that's a useless platform. It doesn't do anything. But to me, I'm like, that's creating a lot of value for individuals that otherwise wouldn't be able to afford that education. But if I ended up charging for this platform, now in the eyes of government, well, that's adding to GDP. So that's positive. We've now improved the quality of life for our citizens. And in reality, what I've done is actually now made that content even harder to access. And so I think what's interesting is that the world I think we're moving towards is going to move away from some of these monetary metrics that we deem as success and move more towards what is quality of life? Like, how do we measure happiness in a more quantifiable way? How do we improve our quality of life without necessarily having to go and have a consumerist society? Anyway, there's a little bit of a roundabout rambling response, but hopefully that makes a little bit of sense.
This is also one of the main points for Bitcoin adoption. And for me, I receive from other people, and this is a legitimate and fair question that people make because they live in this, we live in this fiat system. Also, we should differentiate if someone is saying, okay, I cannot touch Bitcoin or it doesn't have value still in 2025. Sometimes I don't even start the discussion. But with this question, it's important to reply. For my experience, it's also hard to catch in 5 or 10 minutes discussion. What I also recommend is people, as you said before, there should be a work behind. So they should read the Bitcoin Standard plus other books. Now also your hidden cost of money, because from someone that is in the fiat system, understanding that deflation is driving abundance future, I think is really hard. It sounds easy for us because we are already in that level, at that stage. Also for me, it took a while.
No, you dropped it.
Okay,
so let's wait.
Let's wait. What do you think, I say? Is for us now it's easy to understand, but to bring someone that is thinking that 2% stimulate inflation to the point that deflation is create abundance. For me, I try to explain, but then I also say you need to study economics and read books. It takes maybe hours. It's not something that in 3 minutes you change idea, I guess. What do you think?
No, for
Yes,
sure. And this whole discussion about GDP is the right discussion to have, because we're literally making plans or steering the ship the wrong way when we're really try to increase GDP. I saw a tweet of the White House when they shattered the GDP growth expectations, but I'm seeing that, and I think, I mean, it is some good intentions to grow the economy or to grow the level of wealth for the people, but I mean, exactly what we're talking about here. It doesn't necessarily mean people are becoming more wealthy or becoming more happy.
yeah, I think a metric would be also the measure of time, how much time you saved doing what you like, so measuring happiness, because people waste a lot of time working for fiat money, so they can work less and maybe produce more, and then be happy, stay more with the family or do other stuff.
Yeah.
We have back Seb. Hi, back.
Hey guys, sorry, my internet just dropped randomly. What I was going to mention, what came to mind as you were speaking, and I apologize if one of you guys touched on this point. There's two things that come to mind. First, what I find really interesting about the world we live in today is we, as I mentioned, with the 3 Ps and the 3 Cs earlier on, prestige, power, and possessions, we believe happiness comes from kind of prestige, these positions of power, buying the newest Lamborghini, buying the Rolex watch. But what is really interesting is, and we're seeing this increasingly with a lot of Bitcoiners, is as they're going back to a more simple life, as they're going back to living off the land, as they're going back to having a family, you could have an individual that lives in the middle of nowhere, that kind of grows their own food, that gives back to the local community, that has a family, and they've got immense wealth. And when I say wealth, I'm not talking about monetary wealth. They feel their heart is full, their capacity is kind of phenomenal. And on a GDP metric, again, they're contributing very, very little. And so this is where I think we've got to reframe, what do we deem as success? And I also think that as we start to see money shift towards something like Bitcoin, where our purchasing power is appreciating over time, if people are consuming less and they're saving more, that means less capital is flooding towards poor quality businesses that are throwing out cheap products. And if there's less capital moving towards those businesses, what it does is incentivize competition. So the quality of goods actually starts to rise and the poor quality manufacturers wither away. And so I think it changes the incentives on so many different levels. And the final point that I'll make is that there was an interesting talk I listened to by Jeff Booth a little while back. And one of the things he was mentioning is it's like, we constantly talk about monetary transactions, GDP, but at the same time, we're facing massive inflation where life is getting harder and harder and harder. And if you were to ask a homeless person who's living on the street, would you rather live in a world where prices are rising, or would you rather live in a world where prices are falling? Which one's going to support you better? And it's nearly always going to be the latter. And so I think that under a world where prices are falling, where we're incentivized to save, where it's easier to get ahead, the benefits are numerous. And it ends up supporting people on such a different level that may not be captured in GDP, but it provides so much more value where people have more capacity to show up more authentically.
Yeah, I mean, I have this little anecdote. I have 2 little kids, and I was picking them up this afternoon from the school. And in the Netherlands, we all have bikes, and but we have also cargo bikes. But we have these cargo bicycles for persons for your kids. So this afternoon, I'm gonna pick up my kids, and we're driving in this cargo bike, and the sun is shining, and we're driving through a forest, and it's just, life is so great, and I'm so grateful that I have this mindset, and Bitcoin really gave me this mindset that I want to spend time with my family. I also want to create things, and I also want to be successful in my profession. But I also do like to spend time with my family, and I mean it's just great. And I really feel happy in such moments.
Oh,
so
man,
yeah,
I could not agree more. And I think that as money breaks down, it consumes more of our mind share. And so as we become more fearful, as we become more stressed, our aperture of awareness narrows to just survival. Whereas I think the inverse is true for Bitcoin. And it's kind of the point you're making. Like as Bitcoin's purchasing power increases, we have more capacity. And as we have more capacity, we can lean into really what matters most to us, whether that is family, whether that is hobbies, and I actually want to kind of better myself. As I mentioned earlier, I want to challenge myself. I want to give back to my community. I want to spend more time with my kids. And so I think the world just feels so much more abundant when we have more capacity. And I think this is where, like, one of Jeff Booth's quotes is just like, when there's abundance in money, as in there's lots of supply of money, there's scarcity in everything else. When there's scarcity in money, there's abundance in everything else. And I find the perfect example that for me was one of those tipping points in Bitcoin that really helped shape my understanding of Bitcoin, was recognizing that the reason why house prices and farmland and these assets just continue to go up and up and up is simply because they're being used as stores of value because money no longer stores value. And so people are storing value in houses. People are storing value in farmland, not to grow vegetables, not to put a roof over their family's head, but just because the money no longer stores value. And where I live in Canada, in Whistler, this little ski resort, 61% of houses are empty. And you're like, we have a housing crisis and 61% of houses are empty because people are using houses as a store of value. Whereas I very much believe that if we had something like Bitcoin that allowed us to simply save in our currency again, houses would be a fraction of the price because people would use them once again for their utility value, the ability to put a roof over people's heads, the ability to kind of farmland, grow crops. And so I think that, to me, I think is something that's so, so cool about living on a Bitcoin standard.
Yes, and if I may, I want to pull on this thread a little bit more about Bitcoiners, and because I saw a tweet from Naval Ravikant, and he said, "Blame yourself for everything and preserve your agency." And I'm not native English speaking, so I had to look up what does he mean with agency. But agency refers to the individual's capacity to take proactive control of their life and outcomes. In this mindset, an ability to identify problems and take responsibility for them and solve them without external permission or excuses. And while I was reading your book, Seb, I really thought about government and central banking. And I think maybe we have this as Bitcoiners, we should like take the lead to take that responsibility back, like ownership. And because it makes sense, if I'm blaming the government that people are poor, then the government would say, all right, if that's my responsibility, then I want to control what I can do with the outcome. So if we push our responsibilities away, we also give our powers away. And if we take responsibility in our own hands, we also take control back. So and I was listening to Peter McCormack with Danny Knowles, and Peter is building out this Bitcoin thing in Bedford. And so I just want to ask you, firstly, about maybe you want to touch on the central banking and the responsibilities, but also what do you think, what should be the role of Bitcoiners that understand these issues? Would you ask for them to step up and take a more leading role in their community to take back the responsibilities?
That's a really good topic. And I would say that, like, knowledge is power. And I'm sure you guys probably agree with this. Knowledge is power. It gives us the capacity to make more informed decisions. And what's interesting about fiat currencies is with central banking, with the deterioration, the degradation of purchasing power, is that people become hyperfixated on survival. And then because we become hyperfixated on survival, we start passing off all of this decision-making onto the so-called experts. Whether it is we're putting our kids in the educational system because we don't have the time to go and educate them. We're putting our hands into the hands of the doctors and the medical experts because we don't have the time to go and research how I can show up from a healthy standpoint. We put all of our capacity into nutritionists to tell us what is healthy for us as opposed to going and researching for ourselves. And so as money starts to degrade, we're so fixated on survival that we have to go and trust all the experts. So then we end up with a centralized system where all of a sudden we no longer have any power. And I think that that's where it's really easy for these totalitarian, these controlling structures to arise, when we no longer are thinking for ourselves. We don't have independence. We don't have the ability to make informed decisions. Whereas what I'm finding just so fascinating about Bitcoin is that as people start to have more capacity because their purchasing power is increasing, they start to notice that, hey, you know what? With more capacity, I can start researching. I notice I've got this gut issue. Why do I have this gut issue? I'm going to dive into food and nutrition. Then they start making more informed decisions about food and nutrition. Then they start diving into, you know what? My kid isn't doing too well in school. I want to understand maybe how can I support them from an education standpoint to better their understanding of the world and think critically about the world. And so I find what's fascinating about Bitcoin is it's distributing that decision making. And not only do we have the decentralization of money, we have the decentralization of knowledge. And that is when I think we have a much more stable society. Because when you actually go back throughout history and you look at all of these totalitarian environments, whereas it's Mao Zedong in China, whereas it's Stalin, whether it's Kim Il-sung in North Korea, what is one thing in common? They're threatened by the intellectuals. They're threatened by knowledge. Mao Zedong killed 46,000 intellectuals, burnt all the books, because when people are informed, they can make their own decisions. They're not going to listen to someone that's trying to take their rights and freedoms away. And so I think that ultimately Bitcoin minimizes the chance of these controlling structures because it puts the power and capacity back in the hands of the individual to make more informed decisions.
Thank you. I just want to take 20 seconds to tell to our audience that this podcast is sponsored by Bitvault. Bitvault.sv is the first wallet solution to solve the problem of physical attacks and hacks. Thanks to our new time delays over multi-sig technology. It's like putting a vault with the time and the padlock and into your pocket in self-custody. It's compatible with all of the hardware wallet, and it's a brand new revolution in self-custody. You can head over to the bitvault.sv site and register for the lifetime subscription at only $199 forever. Thank you very much. Okay, you can go ahead.
Yes, Francisco, thanks. To point to what you said, Seb, now and before. So on the education, on Step Up, I think, Johan, for sure, we should produce as much material and as much good education we can have. But I think, unfortunately, we should not be so much outdoor marketing. I mean, the people should know that we are Bitcoiners and we are knowledgeable about Bitcoin. We will talk with pleasure 24/7 about Bitcoin. But I'm reading also the post in X and my personal experience. If you bring Bitcoin to someone who is not interested in Bitcoin, 99.9%, he will not get it. Different if Bitcoin, maybe they know that we are in Bitcoin and Bitcoin goes up at a certain price, and then they question their assumption, then they come to us. And this is a completely different conversation.
No, you're absolutely spot on. And I think that from my educational background, what I've very much recognized is, one, you always have to meet people where they're at. If you start talking at too high a level, you're just going to lose them. And so I think that it's really important to meet people where they're at and make your discussion relevant to them. If you're talking to a single mum, she probably wants to hear about maybe the impact of money and Bitcoin on her ability to spend time with her children. If you're talking to an economist, he probably wants to hear more about monetary policy, quantitative easing, quantitative tightening, and the impact of money in that regard. And so I think that understand the audience and the person you're talking to, and that's going to make it resonate so much more. And I think the second point that I've found really, really helps, and I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts, is that someone has to understand the problem before they can ever understand the solution. If the first thing you do when you start talking to someone is, Bitcoin's freaking amazing. Have you guys heard it's got 21 million, it's got this 4-year halving cycle, and it's got this difficulty adjustment, you just lose them immediately. Whereas if you start breaking down, you find out what they're interested in, you break down the problem from their perspective, and then you ask, is there a solution? And then you start backwards engineering Bitcoin, people start to understand it from a much greater kind of capacity, and they're intrigued in it. But I think to your point, Alessandro, I think that when it comes to Bitcoin, if someone isn't interested, I've increasingly found just to not waste my time, because it's just like, if someone has got like a wall up and they're willing to push back, you're never going to get anywhere. And so I tend to give time and energy to people that are curious, people that want to lean in, people that have questions. And if people are just willing to attack, then I'm not necessarily that interested. But I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts.
Same. I reach also the level, if someone is not interested, then they shouldn't, for me, if he didn't study enough or is not really intellectually curious about making question, I think Bitcoin meme, have fun, staying poor is the best answer, and we don't waste other time, both our and the time of our interlocutors.
Yes, like we talked with also was a podcast with Robin Seir. He told us, like Michael Saylor is saying, this the need to know. There should be the need to know. If there isn't a need to know, the person doesn't know he has a problem, so it is not looking for a solution. And unfortunately, there's not much can be done. It also can be disappointing for you as a teacher, let's say. But so to solve this problem, it's very easy. I mean, as Sandro said, the knowledge is everything. Because if you tell to the person who doesn't want to know or doesn't know a problem, say, look, you might think of Bitcoin as a BS, but at the end of the day, you didn't study. So because culture and knowledge has intrinsic value. Because even if the more you know, the better, right? So if you don't know, it's your fault. So to quit that kind of conversation is very easy. You didn't study, so that's all about it, and that's important for because after many years, it's not good for us to be rejected or being treated like people who are a bit lunatic or whatever. So you just didn't study. When you study, you can buy. So this is a little trick I always use. It's very helpful. And unfortunately, there isn't a possibility to push Bitcoin to people who don't want to know. They will ask at some point.
Totally. And what comes up as you're saying that is there's a really famous chart that shows kind of adoption, and it talks about how we've got kind of the enthusiasts, the visionaries, the pragmatists, the conservatives, and then it kind of dives into like the laggards, like the people that kind of adopt technology way later than everyone else. And there's this chasm between the early market and the mainstream market. And that early market, it's really hard for people that are not kind of curious free thinkers to kind of understand the technology. And I find kind of to the point that you're talking about earlier, Alessandro, I find that people, unfortunately, they will not change their beliefs until the pain of staying on their current path is greater than the energy it takes to move to a new path. And whereas when you're a very curious individual that isn't necessarily attached to their beliefs, that pain is very easily transitioned. I'm just like, oh man, Bitcoin is fascinating. But to a lot of people, for them to adopt Bitcoin, for them to be able to start saving in Bitcoin, what they've got to get over is the fact that maybe their government doesn't actually care about them. Maybe the central bank is not their best friend. Maybe the money they're using does not serve them. And for them to get over that is a huge shift in their belief structure, which is a lot of energy.
I think a really good point. I also think the price will be a key role because for many, unfortunately, they didn't study enough and now they have a wrong opinion. So the pain to admit to have been wrong is now strong. At one point, maybe Bitcoin price will be so high that the pain of missing out on Bitcoin will be higher than the pain to admitting to have been wrong the whole time. So at this point, they will switch. And the later they wait, the higher will be that pain and the less they can benefit about Bitcoin.
Yeah, and I heard Seb talk about laggards, and I really had to think of this meme about Christine Lagarde, and we say Christine Laggard, and I'm just laughing my ass off.
Well, on this, there is a meme for any discussion we had. For example, when Seb was saying like simple life, there is also a meme with all the watch according to which role you have. So Rolex or more sophisticated, and then there is Bitcoiners on top. They have the Casio or the clothes of the poor is 1,500. 300, the rich is less, and Bitcoiners is €1, 50 cents.
The memes are so great. I mean, the memes are so strong with telling a story. Yeah. I mean, it's incredible. I love it.
And you know what? Like to the Casio example, I find that fiat, unfortunately, as it degrades more, we're constantly looking for that way out. I'm going to buy the lottery ticket. I just want the Rolex. I want the Lamborghini. Everyone's just looking for these like short-term fleeting dopamine hits. We're just looking social media. And what I just love about Bitcoin is we spend so much more time thinking about like, who am I and what do I value and how do I actually want to show up? Like, I want to be my authentic self. And I think that's where true happiness comes from. And I think that, to me, Bitcoin, and this is kind of another discussion, but it's kind of like Bitcoin is a spiritual tool. I think it's a way to kind of ground society in recognizing what actually matters most, because I think we've lost touch with that. As we've broken money, we've completely lost touch with what matters most, and everyone is becoming so disconnected. Like, basically, people are no longer having families because they're simply just trying to survive.
No, for sure, self-actualization is the most difficult thing to achieve, and most people, they don't want to achieve it, because finding out who you really are aside of the construction of society is so hard, challenging. Just a small subset of people want to be free in the end. So how can Bitcoin scale if just a subset of people want to be free? Well, this is a big question, and I think that always is happening in the US or in the American, the politicians, that helps, because also where I live in Switzerland, Lugano, is Mayor is pro Bitcoin, and I've seen with my own eyes, like going to a McDonald's and the employee talking about Bitcoin, also this evil, and then after a few months, when the politics, I think the top-down approach helps, it came, oh, that's the future after 2 years. So what changed? Nothing changed. People above him. That's for sure not how Bitcoin is built. Bitcoin is bottom-up technology, but it really helps. We should take advantage as much as we can from this situation, which has a few, like Salvador, some parts of Switzerland, and now there is the US, but not many people understood yet. Otherwise, it would have been to $1 million already. So this is also part of the Trojan horse of Bitcoin, just going to to infect the powerful people who can really spread the knowledge to the people below them. And so this is a combination of both. And at the end of the day, this top-down approach will compensate the lack of wish of the people to try to self-actualize themselves, because it will flow, and that's also a way where Bitcoin can scale by to the people who don't want to change, and that's how I see it.
It's interesting as you say that, because I think that the majority of people are unfortunately just a product of their environment. And so if people have capacity, then they start to give more back to their local community. They start to maybe look inwards a little more. They start to kind of like think bigger. But when people are struggling, for the most part, I think people just exist in the environment in which they're living in. And so that's not to say that you get people that go against the grain, people that stand up regardless of their environment. When you look back throughout history, you've got people like Gandhi, Martin Luther King, like these people that went against the grain to voice their opinion on something. But I would say that's the anomaly. And I think what's fascinating about Bitcoin is today we live in a world where everybody is feeling the effects of an inflationary debt-based system. And that is impacting all of their productivity, their collaboration, their value creation, the incentives. Whereas Bitcoin changes the water in which we swim. It changes the environment in which we're existing in. And I think that it realigns the incentives towards that collaboration. It realigns the incentives towards value creation. It realigns the incentives towards connectivity and doing what is right, as opposed to trying to take and benefit from others. And that's what I think is truly profound. It's changing the water in which we swim, changing the environment in which we exist in.
Yeah, is doing that. There will be a lot of resistance, and how that plays out, we'll see. If you look at Bretton Woods agreement, Nixon said that he was fighting back against speculators. So one day another president can say the same thing with Bitcoin. So it really depends how society fights back. We are in a lucky situation now with the Trump administration, but that's an anomaly, I would say. A country such big with this, we might not be that lucky in 2 years. The next mandate, if it doesn't win again, things can change. It will not be so easy. We know that it never was so easy in Bitcoin. It will also not be for now on 100% sure.
Well, and when you talk about especially like Nixon and fighting back against speculators, I think that when we have a system built on control, they always have to have some form of enemy to direct that energy towards that enemy. And that's how you kind of create this mass formation, this group of individuals that are willing to create change, but that change is usually negative. And so for Nixon, it was the speculators. When you look at like Mao Zedong, it was the intellectuals. When you look at like North Korea and Kim Il-sung, it was the capitalists. When you look at Stalin, it was the Christians and the farmers. And you're creating, it doesn't necessarily mean that that was the actual enemy that was causing the pain. It's just they're redirecting that energy towards that enemy to be able to create cohesion in a mass. And what I think is really fascinating, and I write about this in the book, The Hidden Cost of Money, which is there's a fascinating, the professor of psychology at Ghent University, I've completely blanked on his name right now, but he wrote a book called The Psychology of Totalitarianism. And
his name is Matthias de Smet.
That's it. Yeah, Matthias de Smet, a phenomenal individual. And so he wrote a book called The Psychology of Totalitarianism. And he basically says that looking back throughout history, across these totalitarian environments, there tends to be 4 stages which lead up to this kind of mass psychosis where people are willing to get behind and do heinous acts, all for what they deem is the better good of society, even though it leads to genocide and you name it. And so the 4 stages are, the first one is loneliness. It's when society is lonely. People are having to work. They can't really get ahead. And so there's a lot of loneliness because they're just existing and working. The second one is meaninglessness. It's when they can't really get ahead. They can't save for a property. They can't really feel like they've got autonomy. They're not able to achieve their goals. And so it's very easy for like meaninglessness to step in. There's just no meaning in life. They simply feel like they're working to live. The third one is free-floating anxiety. And free-floating anxiety is very different than fixed anxiety. If I'm standing on a cliff and I have a fear of heights, I can understand why I have anxiety. I'm standing on a cliff, I've got fear of heights. Free-floating is you feel anxious, you feel kind of frustrated, but you can't quite articulate why. You don't know what's causing it. And then the final one is aggression and frustration. Once you start getting loneliness, meaninglessness, you've got this anxious kind of feeling kind of constantly permeating throughout your life. It's very easy for you to be aggravated and frustrated, and you start to lash out to people. And there's so many studies which show like when these 3 stages exist, it leads to this frustration. Alarm going off. It leads to this kind of like frustration and anxiety. And what I find is really, really interesting is, or Matthias de Smet talks about this, is once those stages are in place, if you say, hey, the reason why you're feeling this anxiety, and it doesn't even have to be true, the reason why you're feeling this anxiety is because of this over here. That is how you create mass formation, and people are willing to give up their rights, give up their freedoms, because all they want to do is solve this anxiety. And so what I find really fascinating is that Matthias, I believe, missed a crucial point. And the crucial point is that in order for these 4 stages to exist, you need to have broken money. Because if you've got money that allows us to preserve purchasing power, if you've got money that gives us capacity, then all of a sudden it's much harder to become lonely as a society. It's much harder to find meaninglessness, because ultimately what I find fascinating about Bitcoin versus fiat is with fiat, let's say I analyze my income right now and I think, you know what, it's going to take me 10 years to save for a down payment for a house. But 5 years into that 10 years, nope, it's now going to take me 20 years. It's very easy for meaninglessness to exist. But the inverse is true for Bitcoin. If I think based on my income, it's going to take me 10 years to save for a house, and then 5 years in, it's like, nope, it's going to take 7 years. All of a sudden, it's like, oh my God, I feel like I've got so much more power. I feel like I'm a lot more in control of my life. I have meaning. I'm able to kind of achieve my goals. And so I very much believe that what Matthias de Smet missed in the 4 stages to totalitarianism is a breakdown in money. And I think a breakdown in money precedes those 4 stages, which I think is really, really fascinating.
Interesting. Thanks for explaining. I've also one point you said also in other podcasts. Also, thanks to you wrote your book after reading many books. I think hundreds of books you mentioned, and I think there is something unique about Bitcoin. It's not only about new technologies, complex, but probably is never happened in humankind where there is such a big asymmetry on what people think about Bitcoin without understanding Bitcoin, and what people think after studying hundreds of hours on Bitcoin. We have other things, for example, if we study 1,000 hours gold, our opinion will not change so much versus the average person who talk about gold. And then there are other topics like new complex technology, for example, brain surgery or rocket science. The average person knows that they don't know, so they don't say things, they don't judge, or they don't make statements against because they know. With Bitcoin is a new complex technology, and this asymmetry is so big. In the book, all your book, you read the topics. Did you ever find something similar where this asymmetry is so big?
That's a really interesting question. I would say that increasingly as I go into Bitcoin and I dive into these subjects, whether it is like education, whether it is nutrition, whether it is the pharmaceutical industry, what I'm starting to recognize is that when there is a monopoly over these spaces, there is an asymmetry in information when you start diving into it. And so, like, you take the educational system. We've been told the educational system it's the best way to educate kids to be able to create an amazing world. And in reality, the educational system is there for a specific reason. It came out of the Victorian era to create a labor workforce. It's not there to create curiosity. It is not there to be inventive and innovative. Instead, it's there to be able to have someone start their shift, do a task for an hour, move on to the next task. It's meant to kind of quell that desire to like go and move on to the next thing, follow the mind, be curious. And so I think that Bitcoin absolutely is at the top of this pyramid you're talking about, where there is this massive asymmetry. But increasingly, as I go down the rabbit hole of Bitcoin, I'm noticing an asymmetry in our understanding of like nutrition, education, like the healthcare industry, things like that. One thing that does come to mind is what I find interesting is I think this asymmetry forms when there is a monopoly in power that wants to tell a different narrative to hide the truth. And there is an interesting book that someone recommended to me called Against the Grain. Now, I haven't actually fully finished the book, and so maybe I've misinterpreted it, but the way that it basically talks about is how we've been told that the state is the most successful way to organize people and to create productivity because it's so much more efficient than hunter-gatherers. It's so much more efficient than all of these small little communities. But what is really interesting is this book argues the opposite. It basically says that, no, the state has told us that it is the most efficient way because the state is what exists today. And as you guys are probably familiar with, it's the victors who rewrite history. So if the state exists today, the state is telling us that the state is the most efficient form to be able to create community and efficiency. But this book would argue that actually there was unbelievable efficiency and there was knowledge and distributed trust in a society built on all of these small little communities, all of these hunter-gatherer tribes, and we've lost that because of the state, which is basically a monopoly on power. And I would say that money is one of the products from that monopoly on power, where it's told us that the most efficient form of money is one that is controlled by a central bank. The most efficient form of money is one that the government has oversight over so that we can have that standardization and trade and such. But I would, as well, I'm sure you guys agree, Bitcoin would disagree. I think when you separate money from state, I think the world is going to be a very different place.
That's also why we are here.
Yeah. So no, I have some note from the book, but I don't know. My questions. I asked my question. So I don't know if you have more pressing questions.
No, from my side.
I'll ask, how do you envision the transition? So now we are at debt-based cycles, money printing, and at the end of the day, if Bitcoin starts working and we go towards deflation, the government hates deflation. No, they are afraid of deflation. They will never allow it. So they will start printing money again. And then also the people who didn't get Bitcoin, they will ask for more money printing because they want to get richer. The house is pricing too higher for the one who hold it, at least talking about the middle class, thinking to save because. So at what point the system will start to satisfy them money printing and when as long as in the same time Bitcoin is getting traction, is going higher, is retaining value. When do the inflated value clashes with the actual value of Bitcoin, and is going to topple it? Do you think it's going to be a gradual process, or maybe the only way is to have a big crisis or it's going to be an inflationary crisis, which is going to be hyperinflation? It's still a crisis, but hyperinflationary. That's what I would think about it, but curious about your opinion on the transition.
I wish I had a crystal ball and could look into the future.
Okay.
In terms of how I think it may pan out, the first thing I'll say is earlier we talked about this idea that people transition to a new system or a new belief structure when the existing system, it's more painful to stay in the existing system than it is to move to the new system. Now, when half the population, like in the case of the UK and most Western nations, benefit more from the system that they pay in taxes, it's going to be very hard for those individuals to transition over to a system like Bitcoin. It's going to be very hard. And so I think what we're going to see is where Bitcoin is, to your point, going to slowly appreciate or rapidly appreciate over time. And people are going to see the benefits of living on a Bitcoin standard and the improvements in the quality of life. Now, whether or not that is a slow transition or whether or not that is just like a deflationary shock that either leads to massive hyperinflation or a collapse of the existing system, I'm not quite sure. But what I do find really fascinating is Bitcoin is the first time ever in history that we've had an asset that is digital in nature, but we can also self-custody that asset. Because every asset prior to this has either been physical in nature, so we've had gold, we've had property, we've had cash, we've had resources, and these assets, you can custody them yourselves, but you're essentially stuck within your border of your nation. So you're basically subservient to the government. If you want to go and move those assets overseas, it's almost impossible. You can't go and move your house overseas, the value of your house overseas. So that means you're subservient to the government. The government can kind of do whatever it wants to be able to do. On top of that, you've got digital assets, you've got stocks, you've got bonds, you've got all of your tax-advantaged government accounts, your pension, all this kind of stuff. But you can't take custody of those assets. They're held by a third party. So you have to put so much trust in that third party, and the government oversees that third party. So if the government says freeze that person's assets, they can do that. And so essentially, we're stuck under the thumb of our nation. We're stuck under the thumb of the government. Well, with Bitcoin, because it's digital in nature, as you guys are familiar with, and you can take self-custody, I can walk over my border into the States from Canada, totally naked, and I could have $1 billion of value in my head, and no one has any idea. And so we've never had this before, ever in history. So what I think is really fascinating is we may have a large population in any given nation that is subservient to the government. It's reliant on intervention. But at the moment, the society is existing because of the productive workforce that is adding value, and they're taking from that productive workforce. Eventually, the productive workforce is going to realize it is not worth my time. When I'm spending 40, 50, 60% of my purchasing power on taxes, and I'm not getting anything back, I'm just going to leave the country. And now I can leave the country with all of my wealth intact. And so naturally, I think to your point, Francesco, I think that we're going to see capital flight from a lot of these nations that are abusing their citizens, that are using their purchasing power to go and support the unproductive section of society. We're going to see capital flight. We're seeing it in the UK. We're seeing the biggest amount of millionaires ever leave the UK since the start of this year. And these systems, the people that are existing underneath these subservient systems, they're going to realize pretty quickly life is getting really hard. And why is it that the people that are living in these other countries that are using Bitcoin, why is life getting easier for them? And I think that's that tipping point where we start to see, okay, you know what? I'm willing to transition. I'm willing to move overseas. Or you end up with that like deflationary collapse, that inflationary collapse, where people no longer support the government. And we see something like Argentina or Milei, and we go towards like a much more of like an anarchist, let's cut the government in half. And so I think it's interesting. I think there's a few different ways it can go.
I'm super bullish also like you on the power, on the finding of self-custody from the people in this hyperinflationary bust scenario, because that's where you really need it, and that's where people will appreciate it, will have more value, and they can move in 1 second to another place and bring their wealth with them. Yeah, it's built for the hard times, Bitcoin, and we are always bullish on it.
Totally. And I'm curious, like Alessandro and Johan, like, would you add anything to that? Like, where do you think this tipping point is going to take place? Is there going to be a massive shock, or do you think it's going to be a slow transition? Like, what do you think?
I think, firstly, I was thinking after 100,000, there will be people will realize what Bitcoin is, but we saw that it's not enough. I think now the cycle are changing. Probably in the next 2 or 3 years, we will see price appreciation, boring times where Bitcoin goes up, then consolidate goes up. But at one point, as we said, no one wants to be in the first row, no one wants to be in the last row. At one point, the world will agree that a certain percentage in the portfolio it's good for anyone, and then there will be a Bitcoin rush. Before I was thinking it was happening earlier, and now I think it will happen maybe some years from now. But probably there will not be a bear market anymore. So maybe in next few years it goes to 200, 300, 400, and then it will become more institutionalized. People will say, okay, 5% is okay. And from that moment, maybe there will be a Bitcoin rush, and this will change things. That's how. But as you said, this is actually a very good point to discuss. We know that we don't know. We just made hypotheses how it could play out. We know
But
that
we
Bitcoin
are,
will be, right?
we are
know that
also
actually-
biased. We are also biased a bit.
Yeah.
We
we are.
discussed also in other podcasts. We know that Bitcoin has already won. It's like playing a lottery ticket, and we have already we know that our ticket is winning. We are just waiting that the lottery is saying you won.
Well, and you know, there's that famous quote at the start of the movie, The Big Short, and it basically says, "It's not what you know." Wait, what does it say? It's not what you don't know that gets you in trouble. It's what you know that just ain't so. And so it's kind of this idea that sometimes we think it's going to be all these external things that are going to collapse, and this is going to happen, and that's going to happen, and that's what's going to get us in trouble. And in reality, it's actually what we know that just ain't so. It's what we think is true, and it's not true. And so this is where, to me, this is why I'm very much of the opinion, don't leverage yourself in Bitcoin, because it's just like, you can think Bitcoin is going to rocket to $1 million tomorrow. Bitcoin can also go down 80%. It's done it so many times. And I hate to see people that leverage themselves and then get blown up into, they understand this asset and now they end up with nothing.
Yeah, and I want to add to Alessandro's point. I was thinking about it a lot, how that transition may occur. But one thing I learned when I was always of the opinion that we had some big crash, like the US dollar ain't worth anything, or the euro's going down, but every time something happens, and this is what you write about in your book, Seb, I mean, if banks fail, I mean, they will print money and they will help them. We had interest rates spread rising between Germany and Italy, and they come up with this program, and it was the I don't know what they call it, the egalitarian program, that everything will be equal between each other, but it all will be solved in short term with money printing. But I'm from the opinion that it will take a long time. And I don't think it's going to be a big bang, because they're going to solve it every time with more money creation. And there will be a point that a lot of people are already, they already stepped into hard assets like Bitcoin. But every time I think there's going to be a big crash, they will just kick the can down further down the road. So, yeah.
And what comes to mind, and I don't know, with Riverside, can I share my screen for a second? I think it works. Let's have a look. Screen share. Let's see if
you should
it works.
be able to do it.
Window here. Can you guys see my screen? Is that working?
No.
Come on, screen share. Share screen. Anyway, I don't think it's working. What is interesting is I was trying to share a chart, and this chart blew me away. I kind of stumbled upon this chart in about 2020, and the idea behind the chart is that it shows for every $1 of debt, how much does that $1 of debt impact GDP? And so what we see is the more debt we have, the less of an impact that dollar of debt has on GDP, because more money is going towards servicing that debt, the interest payments. And what you see is like the euro area from 2007 to 2017, $1 of debt was impacting GDP by 45 cents, and then it's down to 38 cents. So a 17% decline in its ability to create change. In the UK, it went from 43 cents to 36 cents, 17% decline. In China, it went from 71 cents to 36 cents, 49% decline in its ability to impact change. And so all reporting countries globally, because we've borrowed more and more and more, that dollar of impact on GDP has dropped by 18%. And that's across a 10-year period. And so maybe to your point, Johan, I think that the more we inject capital into society by borrowing money, the less of an impact it has. And there's a tipping point where eventually that just hits zero, where actually it's just like every dollar of debt is doing nothing because we've got so much debt. And I think we're getting closer to that point, because this was 2017, 2018. And since then, we've seen the pandemic, a massive borrowing. Canada went from one of the most fiscally responsible countries in the world to the second most indebted nation in the world, with 422% debt to GDP when you take into account public and private sector. Like it's mind-blowing.
That's true. But on the other side, point on Johanna that is maybe taking longer. The dollar is a bad money, is a good currency, and is the best currency. Before the dollar inflate in a hyperinflation, should we not see the hyperinflation on 50, 60 other currency? And when this country have hyperinflation, will not use the dollars, reinforcing the message that the dollar is a reserve asset? So it may take long for this reason.
No, I fully agree. And that's where there's always, there is like the gradually then suddenly. That's kind of like the one phase where it's just like, look, these things happen over such a long, protracted period of time. Like we think, oh, the dollar's dying. But then it can be another 20 years. It can be another 15 years. It can be so much longer than we think. And then there's also that famous saying in the financial markets, which is the market can stay irrational for longer than you can stay solvent. And then again, like bringing up the Big Short, you see Michael Burry, the hedge fund investor, he looked at all these mortgage-backed securities, all of these financial products that had tons and tons of mortgages jammed in them. And he was just like, my God, this is like a nuclear bomb waiting to go off. So he started shorting the housing market in 2006. But it wasn't until the third quarter of 2007 that the market started to collapse. And by that point, he had nearly gone insolvent in his fund. And so this is the thing is like, when earlier I mentioned the idea about kind of leverage. Bitcoin, there's no such thing as certainty, but I ask myself the question, do I think money printing is going to stop anytime soon? And the answer is no. So I think Bitcoin in the long term is going to continue to go up. As for what is going to happen, I'm not sure. I have no idea, but I feel confident that it's just going to keep going up because of money printing.
Yeah, nothing is going to stop this train.
Yes. As in the film, at the beginning, he was the idiot, and then he was the genius. Bitcoin probably were the same. In 2022, we were the kind of idiots worldwide because it crashed 80%. At one point, that we recognized that we were right. We know that it will happen. We just know, we don't know when.
Totally.
Yeah, and when we say we are biased, it's not because we are biased as Bitcoin, but as living in the West, where we should be under democracy, and then the majority of the world is under dictatorship. So we're talking about the value of self-custody or moving your funds. So if we have this problem now with the money printing, think about the country who not only have the problem, but also are under totalitarian government. And so the intrinsic value of Bitcoin is even higher for them. And so in times of uncertainty, I think all of these forces under 90 countries out there, they will come up with one acceleration. But that we cannot be even depending only from our countries because there's so much bigger world, and the problems which Bitcoin solves are so many that can be a combination of factors which are also accelerating of course, US is the best economy, but and Europe, but there are also, in terms of number of people, we are not the majority. So there's many factors at play.
I think that's a really good point as well, which is we're actually seeing the fastest rates of adoption of Bitcoin, not in developed countries, Western countries. We're seeing in developing countries because those individuals, again, going back to the point that we've made a few times, like people transition when the pain of staying in the existing system is greater than transitioning to a new system. And when you're living under hyperinflation and there's just like, it's almost impossible to go and buy a loaf of bread, it's that point which people are like, I need a way out of this system. So then they go start adopting Bitcoin. So in like African nations and stuff, we're seeing communities that are growing so quickly using Bitcoin, which I think is so cool. But again, like to your point, the US dollar, the euro, the Canadian dollar, they're going to be some of the last currencies to fail. So I think we're still seeing slower adoption in these currencies.
And on your point, is that for the same reason was MicroStrategy and MetaPlanet among the first who were Bitcoin treasury company, not Google, Facebook. They were having struggle. And MetaPlanet is a hotel company. Now they left with one hotel. And Michael Saylor is saying 2020 was struggling with the company to do something in order to have the company surviving on going through COVID. And then he discovered Bitcoin. Google, Facebook, Amazon, or other big companies, they are fine. They're fine with the current system, so they will come later. I think we are now approaching the end of, actually we did exceed our generally 60 or 70 minutes, but the topic are so interesting. And it make me also sad of one thing on Bitcoin is that there is still so much misconception between what is Bitcoin and the rest of crypto. They think about this together. For example, I go sometimes now, I'm asked more about what is Bitcoin because Bitcoin went up on price. First, I discuss about price. Then I have 2 or 3 minutes to discuss about what is Bitcoin, because now we live in this TikTok world. If you 2 or 3 minutes is already a lot of time span. And the next question sometimes is, but what about Dogecoin or what about Trump coin? And we had now 1.5 hour discussion so deep on the humanity and civilization, and people think that we are the same with them, with the others that are just discussing about Dogecoin or Trump coin.
No, I have the same experience where it's so hard sometimes because you spend so much time working with a friend. They ask you all these questions. They're starting to get it, and then you meet with them like 2 weeks later, and they're just like, "So I thought I'd spread my risk, and I've bought Solana and I've bought Ethereum," and you're just like, "Ah!" No! I'm just like, the fiat system has basically made all of these cryptos enticing because they're simply lottery tickets. Everyone is struggling so much, they're looking for any way out. And the difference is, it's just like Bitcoin is not trying to be a lottery ticket. Bitcoin is not trying to be this 1000x thing that's just going to go up in the next 2 weeks and you're going to be able to retire. Bitcoin is trying to make saving possible again to the point where you can just preserve your purchasing power in a savings vehicle. And if we just have a savings vehicle, then we don't need the majority of the whole financial sector, because that only exists because money no longer acts as a savings vehicle. And so it's like trying to get a point across the point that crypto is a byproduct of fiat. Bitcoin is not that same byproduct. It is the competitor to fiat.
Yeah, totally. Let me think also, we were discussing about memes, the guy who is saying, after talking 5 hours about Bitcoin, the first question from my friend is, but what about Dogecoin? And the blood is throwing from the ears.
Yeah, looks like it's coming to an end. So there is no flipping, there is no rotation, there is nothing. It's just the VCs finished the funds, the money there to pump their tokens because what happened before, and now it's all over. Thankfully.
I do find, like, if you go on Google and you just type in like the Bitcoin dominance chart, like what is Bitcoin sitting at right now? 58%, which means, like, for those that aren't necessarily familiar with this, as long as it's sitting above 50%, then Bitcoin is worth more than every other cryptocurrency combined. And so you'd ask the question, if Bitcoin was the first cryptocurrency, arguably, and it still is the biggest and not a single other one has been able to dethrone it, then you're wondering, it's just like, has there really been value created in that space? And so that's where it's just like, to me, it's just Bitcoin is kind of the signal and everything else is a noise.
Yeah, unfortunately, what happens to me is that people who are attracted to it, they are still reiterating the fear system we talked before, and they are trying to gamble, trying their luck, the lottery ticket, the moonshot, because that's the fear system. So crypto is the fear system into cryptocurrency. That's how it is.
Great point. Guys, I think maybe it's time now to approach towards the end. Last question from my side, Seb, where people can find you in X or in X or in internet?
Totally. So I'm on just Twitter or X. I still like calling it Twitter because I feel odd saying X. And it's just Seb Bunney. And Bunny is like the rabbit, but it's spelled Bunney. You can also have a website called sebbunny.com, and I have a little blog. I don't post on it too often. I only tend to post when something inspires me. And that's just sebbunny.com. And then finally, there's Looking Glass Education. That's for a lot of these articles that were put out over the years. And yeah, I've really enjoyed this conversation, and more than anything, I never want price to be a barrier to people's education. And so if someone's listening to this and they don't have the money to go and necessarily purchase my books, whether it's Beers for Bitcoin or The Hidden Cost of Money, feel free to reach out and I'll give you the ebook for free. I just want people to be able to learn, and I think that being able to share knowledge is so important. But again, I really appreciate you guys having me on, and I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks for joining, and I could also reiterate, it was a great conversation. I really enjoyed the time, Bitcoin. This conversation will make me think more and more that Bitcoin has a great future with such big and deep thought thinkers like you in the Bitcoin space.
Absolutely, and what I find really interesting is that Bitcoin, the irony of Bitcoin being digital money is that it gets us to stop thinking about money. Because I think with fiat, when money is breaking down, everyone is just constantly thinking of money. Our mind share is constantly consumed by money. And so I think it's so amazing about Bitcoin because it gets us to stop thinking about money and start thinking about all of these other aspects of society and how they interconnect. And that is what I just find so fascinating.
Good point.
Thank you, Seb. It was a great conversation, and I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you, Juan.
Thank you so much. We really hit really hot point in the education and the difficulty in people to getting it and what can be done. But I think people watching this video can really spark the interest to go dig deeper and not to go to chase the next lottery ticket and try to find something of value in this space, which is Bitcoin.
Wait, so you guys aren't invested in Doge? Oh, I could have sworn you guys were invested.
My last question would have been, which are the 3 altcoins that you would recommend for our listeners? After 1.5 hour discussion. Obviously, I'm joking. Thanks a lot again, Seb Bunney. And with that, listeners, see you next week for the next episode.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, guys.